Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our final session of Tuesday. We appreciate those of you who've been here with us most of the day, and for those of you who are at your first session today, we even appreciate you a little bit more for coming to a 4 o'clock. We have a great group here, and it's actually going to be really worth your while. Really interesting topicality, led by our Brand Response Council Chair, Chris Foster of Modern Postcard. If you watch any of our webinars, if you watch our Take 20 webinar video series, which runs every other Wednesday, Chris is our host for that. Always worthwhile, always great stuff, and we're thrilled to have him here with a tremendous group of leaders. So we also want to say thank you, as always, to our sponsors, particularly our education sponsor, Pacific Media Technologies. They've got a brief word they want to share with you before we get started.
I started PMT to apply the principles that I learned in the live television business to the DR delivery business. What makes PMT different is our people and their dedication to this industry. Quality is the key to what we do, and as the DR business changes, we'll be changing with it and we'll be ahead of the game.
Pacific Media Technologies. Technology driven, quality guaranteed.
Thanks again to PMT. Topic today, how cutting-edge marketers are navigating the regulatory maze. Again, Chris Foster, Modern Postcard, is our moderator. I'll let him do the intros from there. Chris, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. There we go. Excellent. Thanks so much for coming at 4 o'clock. We like it. We appreciate it. So appreciate everybody being here. And we've got a well-rounded panel. We have Linda Goldstein from Baker Hostetler. We've got Dan Kelly, Brightline, Les Collegian from Raw Botanics, and Cody Tenslow from the Composite Agency. So today we're talking about how cutting-edge marketers navigate the regulatory maze. As we know, states and regulations are different than the federal regulations. We know CBD is coming up. We know online gambling has gone through lots of iterations and changes. There's new plant medicine coming up in the next several years that is going to be fluctuating with their regulatory restrictions. So we're going to talk about all of that today. And the first topic we're going to talk about is kind of this third rail, right? So some of these things like gambling and CBD, I don't want to touch it because it's going to be too challenging, but we've seen an evolution. So from third rail to sponsorship, we've seen online gambling. So if anyone was paying attention to the MLB playoffs, there was one big ad behind the batter. That was for DraftKings, right? Years ago, wouldn't have even touched. But it's kind of part and parcel now. So Dan, I'm going to start with you. You had firsthand experience with the NFL dealing with DraftKings and some of this issue. So how did it actually reach this tipping point of being totally outside of the box to being completely inside the industry?
I would say it comes down to the social acceptance and a little bit of testing. You mentioned the league, the NFL, they had a very hard stance against anything gambling related. As an employee, you weren't supposed to go to a casino that had a sports book. And now they have the Red Zone that's sponsored by a sports book. So, it's an evolution that's definitely based upon social acceptance. And then, and again, to the testing and learning, we'd mentioned earlier how, the draft or fantasy drafting and stuff, it went from a fantasy season to daily fantasy. And, there were two partners that probably overdid it about, 6 years ago, where every single commercial break had at least both of them, sometimes more. And that raised a lot of people's eyebrows and like, wait, why, what is this? What are they doing? How can they afford to be that often in the, pretty much some of the most prime real estate in sports?
Yeah, and so what I think is interesting is people have read the book Crossing the Chasm, right? You have this structure when something becomes a late majority product. You got your innovators, your early adopters, and then it crosses that chasm into market acceptance and that kind of public opinion space, right? So Linda, it seems like this public opinion piece is a big factor, but there's also the tax revenue.
Yeah, so ultimately, that's loud. Ultimately, what got them across the chasm was figuring out a way that it could be a revenue generator for states.
Right.
And once that became part of the equation, then the states started following suit. because once one state's getting the revenue, first of all, actually two things happen, and the revenue can also impact public opinion, because if you're not regulated in every state, not only are those states not getting the revenue, but then their residents get pissed, like, why can't I play? I want to play. Or I know, we're going to talk about marijuana. Why can't I smoke? I want to smoke. And so the two really kind of do dovetail. The revenue helps, really helps get the states on board, and then that tends to shift public opinion as well. But I think ultimately you do have to start. I think when we look at all the different categories that kind of fall into this pattern, they're all products or services that fundamentally consumers want, and they're not inherently dangerous.
Right.
And they can be regulated. So then it's just a question of figuring out how to bring all those pieces together. And to your point, about people being ready, it's an evolution. So we didn't start this with, let's go right out of the box for sports betting. It never would have happened. It happened because we started with fantasy sports that looked like gambling, but it wasn't really gambling. Then with daily fantasy, it started to look a little bit more like gambling. And then once everybody was on board with that, it wasn't that big of a leap to get to actual sports betting. And I think it's going to be the same with other categories we're going to be talking about.
And we can see that pattern actually developed back in Colorado, because Colorado for decades had been a place where it was kind of a widely accepted use of CBD. And the graph that we're showing here is kind of showing the states with adult use cannabis over time and the projection of states that are going to be more friendly to CBD products in terms of their regulation and adoption. And what we learned from Colorado was there was public opinion, it was widely accepted publicly. When the legislature moved in, there's a lot of tax revenue for the schools. And so suddenly other states were like, well, we can follow that model. So because we're talking about CBD, Les Collegian, founder of Raw Botanics, as this e-commerce CBD brand, and you look at this chart and you look at these states, you have a website, you sell nationally. Talk to me about how kind of you see this changing climate giving promise for your emerging brand.
Well, yeah, I think first off, it's important to mention that I've owned an advertising agency for 22 years. So prior to starting this health and wellness business, I really thought, hey, I know what I'm doing in marketing and I get it. And I'm going to be able to do this and really get my point across. And then I realized that I really don't know what I'm doing. According to how this is working, I mean, the industry is just rife with hypocrisy. And what I'm realizing as an e-commerce brand, the way to do this, because we really do believe in our products. We believe they help people. It's multiple cannabinoids and functional mushrooms, not the psilocybin mushrooms we'll be talking about. But we believe in it, and we know there are studies, and we have the clinical studies to show them on our site. We have to lead with education. But when we try to market and target market to our primary, secondary, tertiary markets through Facebook or Instagram, if you say CBD or anything close to what looks like CBD, you are shut down. Now, why I say hypocrisy is there are other companies that are advertising CBD on Facebook, and they say CBD on Facebook. And we try to figure out how are they doing it, and we realize it's a pay-to-play environment. They will turn their heads if you're giving them enough money monthly. And that's an interesting dichotomy. I don't understand how that's even happening. Google is obviously Google, and they are allowing the words hemp and not CBD. So we are trying to figure out how to change certain ads and landing pages to say just the words hemp. But it has been the only way for us to truly, and by the way, we also said, hey, by the way, the Farm Bill, I mean, we're all in the right direction. This will be legal and everything will be perfect in a year. Well, that was like, who knows when that's going to take place. Yeah, that was right. And so here we are. Just a year ago. Yeah, just a year ago, right? And so here we are. I was told there would be no math. I didn't know. So here we are. 4 years later, and we're still struggling to get the word out. So right now we are really just doing our best as an e-commerce brand to educate people on how this works and how to go to something natural versus synthetic.
That's right. And speaking of something natural, Cody, I'd like to go to you on this. And unless you just mentioned psilocybins and kind of natural products, just strangely today in the New York Times, there's an article about companies that are filing patents for psilocybin products. So one of this company is called Compass Pathways, a psychedelic medicine company, and their valuation is $450 million. The projection for this type of market space was that it was $3.8 billion in 2021, projecting $8.3 billion in 2028. Cody, when you look 5 years ahead into the plant medicine category, do you see a similar pattern that Linda talked about rolling out for this type of new market space?
Yes. 5 years ago, if you had said cannabis products at large are going to have this kind of growth, everybody in cannabis would have said, we think it's going to be higher, and everybody outside of cannabis would have said, no way. A couple of comments, one, money talks, right? I mean, how are they doing it? Well, it's called bribery. It's pretty old, so we were pretty familiar with this. But cannabis at large, was this $90 billion worldwide market that we're tapping into. We're not really creating a new market. We're just legalizing the market, and as we bring quality up and prices down, we're able to combat the traditional market, which is another legacy market. It's the black market. We can call it whatever you want to call it, but these things, the illegal market versus the legal market. Specifically, psychedelic plant medicines do not have that kind of marketplace. That's a growth marketplace, not a tap into marketplace. The people who use these things regularly, and I was talking about this in our meeting before, how many people in this room have an iPhone? The world has already changed because of psychedelics. You would not have that phone without LSD. That's not me saying that, that's Steve Jobs saying that. You wouldn't have the Grateful Dead, you wouldn't have the good Beatles, you wouldn't have Google, you wouldn't. That's right, the good Beatles, that's what I mean. It's already changed the world. It's only going to continue to change the world. So in 5 years, I think that public opinion is going to say, wait a minute, this should have never been illegal in the first place. It's okay for it to be regulated, like alcohol or tobacco. And the joke that I've always told is people like to say cannabis is a gateway drug. And I like to say, I sure hope so. Because if we can create a even $15 to $20 billion plant medicine marketplace, and look, it can be recreational, it can be medicinal. I'm not here to judge, and it can be spiritual or it can be scientific. I want everybody on board. But in the next 5 years, I think it might even be faster. You're going to see decrim happening faster, which isn't legalization, but it's always the first step. It's decrim, medicinal, recreational. I don't know why we still have to go through these steps after we've seen that those are always the steps we take. But in 5 years, I mean, those numbers seem low to me, just like I would have said that these numbers seem low to me 5 years ago in cannabis.
Sure. Well, what's interesting, you just talked about that progression and that natural progression and why we have to go through that. Maybe we just do, right? Maybe we just have to go through the decriminalization first, then the acceptance, and then the legislator and the taxing on board, right? And so I kind of look at this new growth market of psilocybin, and we do know, and the article mentioned today, that certain municipalities are decriminalizing it. So Denver, Oakland, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. have decriminalized the psilocybin products. It's the first step, right? But note that it's a municipality. It's not the state or the federal, right? It's a small little area. But I think that probably, I would think, would send some kind of alarm bells to the big pharma industry. So Cody, I'll continue with you. How do you see then the big pharma reacting to the emergence of this new market and product?
How do I see a $14 trillion industry responding to a dangerous to them, small in their grand scheme? I see them responding very firmly. I see them doing every form of skullduggery, bribery, and otherwise just whatever they can do to stop these things from happening or to gain control over the products themselves. and this isn't some sort of conspiracy theory. We've already seen this, but the public opinion is a really important thing, and we were all talking about this earlier, right? The people see what they want, and the people should get what they want because that's who should be in charge. But yeah, I mean, Big Pharma is going to do everything they can to reduce, control, and otherwise corrupt the emerging psychedelics markets.
Or perhaps even get in, right?
Well, they'll say they're getting in it, but getting in it is going to be, again, the kind of control that we're talking about. Like, look, we already know, and I would love to hear your response to this, Linda, about like patenting natural substances, right? That's a no-go for me as a person in the industry. I do not think it should be legal for you to take something that occurs in nature and patent it. And I think there's already some precedent on that. Is that true?
I think you're right about that.
Yeah, so I think that the public will still speak here. A great example that I love to use is beer. Everybody knows, or maybe everybody doesn't, but drinking in general is down. And alcohol companies are scrambling to figure this out, especially the Anheuser-Busch's of the world, right? They are like, oh, what do we do? So they first started just snatching up microbreweries because they saw that they were taking share, right? And now they're like, oh, what do we do? Oh, they want low calorie. Okay, now we're going to start making seltzers. And now what are they going to do? They're going to go, oh, we see the cannabis beverage market rising, and we're going to see very quickly low-dose psychedelic beverages. I already know of a dozen different companies working on this. And so they're going to start steering that way. And then when it's legal, a truly free market will come into place, but it has to be federally legal.
Well,
right?
and what's interesting is I think that AmBev had already talked about seeking planning investment into CBD-infused beverages. And once you start getting into that place, then the targeting and the marketing becomes very selective because you have to be marketing adult products to adults. So Dan, I guess the question that I would have for you on the connected TV space, you see this almost convergence of market opportunity plus the technology. Now, where do you see that happening, and do you see these things kind of flowing together?
Definitely. I mean, the tech is definitely there. You know, the targeting capabilities of the digital world is now available in the CTV and, quite honestly, linear television with addressable. So targeting capabilities are definitely there. They're only getting better, getting, more often, what was primarily just the platforms, the Dish, DirecTVs of the world. They're allocating now. They're working with the broadcast partners to turn on their inventory to be targeted. So, I mean, the ability to definitely hone in and target an audience that's above 21, it's that much more effective now as opposed to some of the self-regulated, a show's composition should have above 75% persons 21 plus. Well, now, like with the targeting and the information that's available on households, IP, you get a much clearer picture of exactly who that user is, and are then able to, target specifically for these mature kind of products. The flip side of that is that with targeting comes some expense. There is definitely a cost to being able to hone in and only deliver your message to those that are really core to your product. And I know that, in my experience within the addressable world and CTV and performance-driven advertisers, those two things are very difficult. So it's a difficult conversation to say, you gotta spend a little bit more to be precise, but wait a minute, I just want, the most efficient cost per
I'm willing to
unit.
pay to let me advertise on it. So.
Right.
Yeah, and exactly, and I think that's going to be the way. That's going to be the growth. I mean, to the acceptance. When the revenue is there, the acceptance tends to follow.
Yeah.
So Les, with that, in terms of a marketer and a brand owner, you're willing to spend more to reach that audience to at least get your product in front of them.
Well, it's logics in marketing. I mean, you don't want to spit into the wind. So you try to find your target market, and you do a lot of A/B testing, optimization on messaging, and then you realize who that customer is, what is their brand persona, and then once you really hit that, maybe the first top 3 brand personas, you really start micro-targeting those, and that's the beauty of the Facebooks and those things, because I can say I have a my best person is 35 to 45 soccer mom making $85,000 a year that likes wine, that likes to travel, and they have all of that data there for me, you know, and so that makes it much easier to target those versus, you know, a wider
Sure.
gap.
Yeah.
So yes, would I pay more? Absolutely. If I can get to my market, you know, and the nice thing about connected is, you know, connected TV is that you have that ability with different shows where you can really micro-target the audiences, but they tie my arms behind my back because they won't let me go there.
Sure.
Well, and sometimes it does come down to buying an audience versus buying a program.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's easier when the program or the network has a list of exclusions.
Sure.
When you're buying an audience, now all of a sudden you've kind of left that notion of buying a program, buying a specific network. You're just going to find that 21-year-old or 35, 50-year-old soccer mom and trust what she's watching.
Right, sure.
But that's where you then run into the fact that, okay, she was watching, something on a network that's not a fan.
Right.
It's family entertainment or something else, and how do you just need to make sure that your targeting includes excluded networks, programming, and things like that.
Sure.
What's interesting, though, is that you had mentioned before Facebook is almost self-regulating themselves in terms of which brands they let. Google absolutely self-regulates themselves. So I guess, Linda, I'd like to ask you about the self-regulation, right, where the value of regulatory practices within the industry can help shape that public opinion.
So if you look at, certainly again the gaming industry is one that has not been subject to self-regulation, and Cody made a prediction, I'm going to make a prediction. I think they're going to start to see some problems in the coming years because there are already rumblings within the FTC and state AG's offices that some of the advertising is actually running promos and different kinds of incentives that are less than clear to consumers. And so I think they were able to get public opinion shifted because they had revenue to offer, and they had big partners like the leagues, all of whom came in and took pieces in all of these companies and all of the ventures that were going on. But I think self-regulation can really help shape public opinion in a number of ways. First of all, it helps soften the regulators. I mean, when they see an industry self-regulating, it doesn't mean they're going to go away and say, oh, you're self-regulating now. People that are here that, have, been in the DRTV industry a long time know that self-regulation has not kept the FTC away from direct-to-consumer, and certainly in the nutraceutical category. It hasn't helped, but it's softened a little bit because it helped create a dialogue. And so that, to the extent that then helps get some acceptance from the regulators, that can help shift public opinion as well. I mean, they kind of, I think they often go together, and I think it goes together with the revenue piece also, but self-regulation kind of weeds out the bad actors, and it really paves the way for the folks that want to do it right to begin to mature as an industry, which I think is, any emerging industry has to get somewhat mature with the companies that are in it for the long haul as opposed to the quick buck. And self-regulation is a very effective way of doing that. And by allowing the industry to grow and mature, I think that helps sway public opinion as well.
No, I think you're right, and we actually saw the Juul scenario. If you guys note and remember, they had a $438 million settlement that they had to pay out. There was no good regulation, right? It weeds out the bad actors versus the good actors, and I think that what I'd like to do is kind of stick with you, Linda, about this self-regulation, because some of that also is the consumer privacy as well. So when we talk about connected TV, we talk about the digital privacy. There's been CCPA, of course, Utah Consumer Privacy Act, and bills in Connecticut, Colorado, and Virginia. Clearly, self-regulation is something that, from a data side, maybe just not be enough, that the government has to step in.
Well, I think, actually talking about connected TV and the ability to target, I actually think as an industry, we need to step up and tell the government or educate the government about the benefits of that. And I think you see the benefits of that when you talk about categories like this, where targeting is essential.
Right.
Because right now, the FTC, which is the most aggressive administration I've seen in my entire career, and I think others would agree, they're out of control. Lena Khan, the chair, wants to abolish all the tech companies, and they are, privacy advocates on steroids. I mean, they have been unable to really get federal privacy legislation done. So what they're doing now, and they announced this last month, and they're moving forward, is they're doing a rulemaking. And what that means is, really without any due process, because first they changed the rules of how they could make the rules, so they did that unilaterally, and now they can basically make the rules the way they want to make the rules, with little public comment and little input. They are about to do a privacy rule, and when they do a rule, it means if you violate the rule, you're now subject to civil penalties. Last year, the Supreme Court took away a big avenue for them to get money. I won't go into all the details because I don't want to bore the audience, but by promulgating rules, they can immediately get civil penalties that, just like CCPA, can become monumental. Mm-hmm. And the essence of what they're trying to do is eliminate targeted advertising. They think it's inherently illegal. The name of this rulemaking is commercial surveillance. It's a rulemaking about privacy, but they don't even talk about privacy. Why? Because, and I think it goes to public opinion, I don't think the public cares anymore if you can deliver messages that they want. They're willing to give up some of their data to get that.
Sure.
So banning, putting heavy restrictions on privacy no longer has the support of the public. So what they're doing is they're actually doing a privacy rulemaking, but they're not calling it privacy. You don't see anywhere mentioned in the rulemaking. It's called commercial surveillance. That sounds like an awful thing. Who wants to be under commercial surveillance? And so it's like a great example of, the power that public opinion has, and we're actually sitting here talking about a tremendous benefit of being able to engage in targeted advertising, and it's on the chopping block.
Right, and it's interesting, you wonder why it is on the chopping block, and Cody, in an earlier conversation, you and I had talked about that data collection is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
$800 billion theft of personal information.
Well, okay, some people might call it right.
I agree with Linda entirely that most of the public does not care. They are like, look, I want what I want, and I want to know what I want, and sometimes I don't know what I want, and it's okay, I don't care. There is a growing group of people who look at this $800 billion industry as theft of private personal data. And I personally, as a person who's been marketing for 20 years, like Les, I have been in the agency business and owned my own for 5. I get it. I get where you're like, oh, wait a minute, though, how am I going to get to these people? The answer is, to me, which might scare a lot of people in this room, but the answer is the democratization and, frankly, socialization of that data, but also the individualization of it, wherein companies are emerging now where they're like, hey, you want your data to be used, but you want to reap the benefits of them having access to your data as well. Because the data isn't just targeting ads to you. The data is a conglomeration of knowledge that allows people to understand public perception and all of these things. And if you were able to lock your data up and then sell it out the way it had been being sold before, and you were able to make $10 a month, whatever it might be on the resale of your data, it's worth more than that. But if you were given the option, a lot of people would be like, okay, sure, and a lot of people would opt out. They just go, nope, I don't care enough to go to the trouble, you can have it. And that is up to the public. It's not up to the regulators. What I want to do always is put the power in the hands of the people. The regulators, they say it's for public safety, but it is usually not. It is usually for high-end corporate and financial interests. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think everybody here knows that that's just the truth, right? So what I'd like to see is I'd like to see less regulation, more personal self-regulation, which is already happening. It happens with cannabis, right? Cannabis, we were talking about this earlier, cannabis is this huge market that we tapped into. We didn't create the cannabis market. It's already there. Everybody who wanted to partake in cannabis was already doing it. There was no question. There's not like, oh, now we've just added another 100 million cannabis users to the marketplace. That did not happen. So I think that the people are the ones that should have the power in general, and especially in this particular instance. I think that really clear opt-in, opt-out. I think sure there could there be companies. I know there's one that's called Bridge that has started, essentially locking up your data via blockchain, and then you can resell your data or use it where you see fit without it just being wiped away. There's plenty of, look at the VPN marketplace. The VPN marketplace went from what's a VPN to a significant percentage of people having one on their telephones, right? So these are things that the public should have the information and the ability to access. That does not mean that anybody here should miss out on data and targeting and all of those things because of a federally mandated thing because of one person's idea.
Yeah, it was the marketer's misuse of data that I personally think that raised the alarm.
I agree.
Right? I mean, and we're all guilty of it, whether it's the buy or the sell side, because the fact that, if you go look for a mattress, because you're in the market for a mattress, for the next 2 weeks, every single ad you see is now a mattress ad from everybody and their mother who has a mattress company.
Everybody in this room is going to start getting data protection ads on their phone.
Exactly. So I mean,
and that's crazy.
If we limit it,
right.
and the tech is there to limit it, weekend frequency like if we got better about doing that, like, hey, I understand you want to hit that house, but they've already been hit 10 times in the last 2 weeks, from a user experience, we're going to protect that. It could be beneficial.
Yeah, it's interesting too. There's a tangential example. Way back in the Wayback Machine, Dove had their campaign for real beauty because they looked at that industry and the cosmetic industry and they were like, there's too much Photoshop, there's too much manipulation, these aren't really real people, so we're going to kind of do away with that and kind of lead that charge from an industry standpoint. So to your point, Dan, if we've got access to data, right? As soon as you have, and we know this, right? If you have an IP address, which is very readily available, you can tack that into a mailing address, which you can reverse append to an email address, which you can also then find a phone number. You can take a phone number and reverse append that to everything else. And then as soon as you have a name and address, you can get all the demographic data, right? The data's there, right? So the question is how you use it. And I think that, the self-regulation piece, I think is really interesting. And unless you had talked about perhaps, the idea of, self-regulation in cannabis, like a cannabis ad council, right? Or a body of research, right? Talking about the blind tests that are coming through to give legitimacy to the industry itself.
Well, first of all, I want to give Cody credit for the ad council because that was all him. But I can just tell you real quick that one of the things that, again, this is it's just a simple struggle, right? It's a struggle of educating people that, clearly. So a simple example of this, our product, one of our products is a sleep product that uses CBN. CBN is it's a form of the cannabinoid. It's a minor cannabinoid that provides a sedative effect. I'm pretty sure that Big Pharma, Ambien, Valium, Xanax, they don't want that out there. And so there's a lot of clinical studies, including there's actually one just recently. It was a double-blind study on CBG for 1,600 patients, double-blind. I mean, that's a ton of data. And it clearly showed relief in anxiety, relief in pain, really all of these great outcomes.
Right.
Yet, no, can't use that. Can't advertise it, can't do that. So it's just frustrating. And so that ad council, I think the concept, Cody, and I'm gonna put this to you and not let you do it, is that I just think it's a great concept in order to help kind of formalize in a way that we can communicate.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not me, actually. It's a group of very smart and amazing people in the cannabis space who have started the Cannabis Media Council. And we had started to try this right before the thing, that's what I call the pandemic. The thing had happened, and a group of people at this, it's an amazing group of people, and anyone who is in the cannabis spaces or the emerging psychedelic spaces should check it out. It's called Trailblazers.
Say it again?
Trailblazers. Trailblazerspresents.com. I am not affiliated. This is not a sales pitch. It's just a thing I attend, and they're amazing. But we were trying to start this thing, and somebody else picked up the ball. Execution is, everything. That's it. But that's what they're trying to do. And you were correcting me earlier, right? I was thinking NAD, not Ad Council. Ad Council is more fascia for, hey, drink milk or whatever it might be, right? But just everybody looking at it. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, I was at Think LA, and I was just talking to a group of cannabis marketers and cannabis entrepreneurs saying, this room right now, we don't need a council. We just got to do better. We have to not have TNA on billboards in Los Angeles. It makes us all look bad. Just stop it. I was very significantly talking about Ignite, who drive me crazy. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, this is the kind of thing that we need to come together and do that isn't happening. And to Dan's point about tech and data, you just have to remember something. Everybody in this room is in the top 1 percentile of knowing how that stuff works, whereas most human beings just do not know how it works. And ignorance leads to advantage, right? And when I say advantage, I don't mean the good kind, I mean the taking advantage kind. So it does come to everybody here to say, okay, that's not the best use of that. Let's at least try to modify our behavior and our approaches so that we don't run into the problem that it seems clear that gambling is going to come into.
Well, just real quick, going back to that ad council, just communication in general, and I brought this up to these guys. It's like, I recently took a call regarding CBN. I took a call from a customer who said, hey, I just recently took your rest product and I want to cancel my subscription. My doctor said I can't use it. I said, okay, no problem. Hey, since I got you on the phone, can I ask you a question? I'm like, well, how old are you, if you don't mind? She's 81. I'm like, wow. I was like, awesome. Did it work for you? Yes. I'm like, okay. So what did the doctor say? She's like, well, that's really weird. I just asked him if I could take this, and he said, of course you can. I was like, okay, and so she said, yeah, I don't know why he did that. And I'm like, so you didn't get any further information about that? And I said, look, I mean, she seemed very nice. We had a nice conversation. I just said, hey, look, here's the deal. I'm not a doctor. Do not listen to me. I don't want to get in any trouble here. However, I disagree with your doctor. And I just want to tell you that we have a lot of patients that are doing this and mixing medications. This is all natural. There is nothing here in this that I believe, again, and I'm saying being very careful here, that's going to do anything. There's nothing to show that. I feel that your doctor is a GP. He's not trained. He's trained to prescribe you Ambien, and that's what you're taking. And she's been taking Ambien for 20 years. 20 years. And I was like, you've got to be shitting me. So we had another customer who is taking, she said the product wasn't working for her, and I said, okay, no problem. I was like, double the dose and let me know how you do with it. It's not going to kill you, don't worry. Which is, whatever. So she did, and she said, okay, you know what? And then she started trying stuff on her own, and she took her Valium, and she took a quarter of it. And she wrote, you can look on our website, she wrote a review on this, and this is how I know. And she said it's not my favorite review because she says she's mixing it with Valium, but she took a quarter Valium and the rest, and it worked. And I was like, all right, look, if I just cut you down to a quarter of a Valium, in your week of a 4 day, 4 days of your week, I'm thrilled. That's a great outcome for me. Sure. And that's the whole goal, and that's what we're trying to get from any kind of message, but we can't make a claim. I can't say, this will make you sleep. We're all different. Right. And by the way, Valium may not make you sleep. Right. it doesn't matter.
We have a lot of responsibility, specifically anyone who's working in the cannabis space, and I'm not taking all of that on my shoulders, but I'm just saying anyone in the cannabis space has a massive educational responsibility and educational responsibility in the emerging psychedelic space. That doctor is doing what he was trained to do. It's a knee-jerk reaction. He does not know. He just knows to say no to anything he doesn't know about, right? Because that's the trick.
trained, yeah.
I mean, if suddenly the Cannabis Media Council started doing an educational campaign strictly for the AMA to say, hey, can we at least have a discussion around official AMA stance on these things? Now we're having the conversation we need to be having, because in the end, they are, you could go as far down as saying this is like collusion with the pharmaceutical companies, which of course it could be, but most of the time it's just ignorance at its basis level. It's just lack of information. I don't want to say ignorance because they're doctors. They could be educated in this and they just haven't been yet. And you do see you're starting to see a shift. It's funny because there's a very clear shift between DOs and MDs. DOs are like, I don't know if anybody knows, DO is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. It's a different training program. It's the same level. They can be surgeons, they can be ER docs, they can be whatever they want. And the MD level is their different trainings, right? But the DO docs are more like holistic in a way. And they've just started to be like, my doctor, I always go to DOs. And when I told him everything that I do, he was like, well, you're a little on the chubby side, but other than that, you're the picture of health on paper, so I can't argue with any of your outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So go.
I wanted to circle back from what Cody just said to where you started, which was, how do you get that path? And so
Exactly.
just tying it together in the gambling space, it didn't really start to move, either both the daily fantasy sports and then ultimately sports betting, until the states came on board because of the revenue. Big established players like the NBA and the NFL started investing and putting money in, and then the casinos, which were the biggest opponents, decided we're getting in the game. Mm-hmm. So that was it. Then it was game over. And the problem we're gonna have with cannabis is I really believe that until you figure out a way to get pharma in, it's gonna be, I mean,
You're right.
The whole homeopathic industry, I mean, I don't want to say how many FTC cases we've handled in the homeopathic area. There is no way the FTC will ever accept that homeopathic products work, no matter how much evidence you bring. And even in the dietary supplement arena, what did they do 10 years ago? They said, you know what? Even though you're totally natural, nothing bad can happen. You got to go out and you got to do a massive double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical study for any claim you want to make health-related about the efficacy of your product. Right. Now, what nutraceutical company can afford to do the level of a clinical study that pharma can? And we've had lots of those cases too, where companies have tried. They'd go out and do a study, with 60 people or 100 people, double-blind, placebo-controlled, and it's harder to get a good result with a small study than a bad study because it's lower powered. And time again, they reject the study and say, nope, it's too small. We're not going to accept it. And so, yes, we'll get to legality. We will get there. Yeah. But in terms of the claims, that's going to be, unless there's a major shift. Certainly not with this FTC. We're not getting there. Right.
Yeah. The one question I do have is a major shift, and it might be with Generation Z, which is interesting. So we know that Generation Z right now is 26% of the global population. They are the largest consumer group. They will be 30% of the workforce in 7 years. So they have, in coming into the workforce and decision-making capabilities, in a completely different mindset, perhaps even getting into legislation, state legislation, moving in the next couple of years. So I'm curious about that to see if that wave changes. And I think, I was going to ask you anyway, but you're always ahead, so you answered the question about the pathway for these products. And I guess, Dan, I'd like to wrap it up with you because we're at time now for questions. You had mentioned before this confluence of technology, consumer behavior, the industry policing itself with its targeting. Do you see a pathway for not just now, plant medicine and CBD, but for liquor brands or other kind of adult brands following this similar runway?
Definitely. I mean, I would say liquor actually is probably one of the ones that started it. Talking about self-regulated, everything that they did was really self-regulated. And, now you actually do see liquor brands on television.
Captain Morgan,
ESPN, several brands have taken that on. Again, mainstream acceptance. Ryan Reynolds Aviation Gin. I mean, some of his spots have been great lately. So yes, that's a category that evolved. Again, self-regulated. Over 75%. 21 plus is supposed to be the content. Based on a Nielsen rating. So, can they do better? Yes. Will that continue to open the doors? Yeah, but I think to the point of when the states figure out what they can make and how they can make money off of it, that's the end all be all. I mean, California right now, we're 2 weeks away from finding out whether or not we can gamble.
That's right.
As much as my house can watch NFL Red Zone on Sunday and see DraftKings sponsored by, if we grab the phone to go ahead and do a bet, it won't work unless you're smart enough to have the tech and the VPN, which bounces out your signal, and they don't necessarily know you're calling from a California location, then you can get in. So
I've heard.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say just one thing about them. I love Gen Z. I love them as people. I love them as a marketplace. But for instance, I think I read the other day, and so please forgive me if I'm misquoting the stat. I think it's like 40% of them do not drink, period. Right? So for emerging alcohol companies, like, whoa, look out, 40% of the emerging population does not drink, period.
It's a huge non-alcoholic flavor.
Right. They love cannabis, and I'll tell you from experience, they love psychedelics.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that they will be a marketplace for the psilocybus and for the natural plant medicine, and I also believe they will pave the way for Generation Alpha coming right after them, and Generation Alpha will be growing up in America where cannabis is more mainstream.
I mean,
tonight's party is sponsored by.
At this point, it does feel like everybody do drugs. That's not what's happening here.
I'm sorry, Linda.
No, I was just going to say also, they are a generation that, unlike your 81-year-old patient, they're not going to necessarily listen to their doctor. If their doctor says, don't take it, and you're messaging to them, this is all natural. That's all of that's a big deal to that generation, and there's nothing harmful in here. And don't listen to your doctor. It's very hard for an 81-year-old to not do that.
Much
It's
easier
not
for a
hard-
21-year-old.
100%.
They're very anti-establishment, which is fine with me.
They can navigate through the tech. So
Yeah.
when they can opt in and out of, sure, you can. You know what? I do want to see ads that are relevant to my age and whatever else. They may cancel out of historical data. Again, to the mattress example, they might not want to be inundated with that, but they're going to want to, perhaps see brands and advertisers that are in line with their beliefs, their viewing habits, and stuff like that. They will opt in and then also opt out where, so again, some of the older set, it's like, no, like, I don't want anyone, like don't take anything from me, or too lazy to read half of it and just say, yeah, shit, give it to me.
Well, and so to wrap it all up, you've got then these forces, right? So I grew up in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, it's a city of three rivers, right? You got the Allegheny, Monongahela, and the form the Ohio, right? So you got these rivers kind of flowing in. You have the technology, you have an emerging generation, and you have probably looser regulations coming in over the next 3-5 plus years. It could be a fantastic opportunity for these market spaces. Thank you, guys. You were wonderful. Aren't they wonderful? Come on.
Any questions for the group? Yeah, I mean, come on, this was entertaining as heck. There's no question. Yeah.
I didn't quite hear Linda's answer on the patents on a natural product. I thought that was a very interesting question you asked. Are there patents being awarded on a natural product?
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm not a patent lawyer, so I want to stay in my lane. I'm a marketing lawyer, but I don't think you can put it that way. There could be a patent. I mean, there's got to be something in it with it.
And patents are usually as related to process as
Right.
they are to product, right?
Right.
So there may be an extraction patent, which already has happened in cannabis over and over and over again, right? And I have no problem with extraction. You know, one of the things about like what we're talking about up here is I understand what you're saying about homeopathy, but I'll just tell you right now, and you may already know, that smoking cannabis or eating psychedelic mushrooms definitely makes you high. So we don't have to worry about whether or not it works. We know it works, and it's been working for 10 to 20,000 years. So we know it works. We don't, but to the process, that's where we have. I don't know. Is it a watch out? I don't know.
What they're patenting essentially, I believe, is it's the psilocybin and then the delivery mechanism combination.
Right.
Right. So that's where it's coming together. So it's how do you deliver it, and we're going to own that.
Right, and so this is the article in the New York Times today. They said Compass Pathways has 50 patent claims out, very aggressive with its intellectual property filings, and its competitors have collectively filed more than over 100 patents applications with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So it's happening right now. But to your earlier comment about the rejection of the patent, how can you patent something that we, as human beings, have been using for tens of thousands of years? And I think, Les, yes, it's the packaging, it's the deliverability. So it's going to be a really interesting question. It's a great article, too, and if you go to the New York Times and you search for it, you'll find it today.
Anyone else? No, we got one over here.
Hi, Sean. Nice to meet you all. You talked earlier about potentially opting in or out of data and potentially these users getting that payback. Who's giving them that money?
I sure hope it's the people who are trying to sell them something, the same as you pay for your billboard, right? You want a billboard up over there on Wilshire, it costs X dollars, right? You don't. The people who are seeing it are your customer, you hope, but initially you had to put out a marketing spend. So to me, it's just going to become a part of your marketing spend.
So any advertiser would then, or agency would then have to pay for each individual's data that we're getting?
I think it's going to probably be more something like they will go to a group who has collected the people who have decided to do this. And right now, we might be talking about 10,000 people, right? But those 10,000 people might be really interesting targets for tech items and things like that. By the way, I'm saying this could be coming. I am not certain that it is coming because I do still agree that a lot of people I don't care what you know. Everybody knows that their phone is the zeitgeist. This is the singularity. It's in your pocket. You know what I mean? And most people, it's attached to them in a surgical manner. So I think a lot of people are probably just going to go, don't care. Go ahead and sell me whatever you want. And every now and then,
I don't care.
and they'll be like, I don't want to hear about mattresses anymore, though. Thank you very much. No more mattresses. So maybe just the first step, if we could just give people a little more control, even if it's a semblance of control, right? That would be helpful. And maybe down the road, people will figure out a way. But I think what would happen is marketers would go to agencies that are housing these people and say, hey, we want access to those people's data because they are actively thinking about what their data is, and therefore, technically, in my opinion, your active user is a more valuable target than your inactive user.
Well, final question, and then I'll stop.
It's okay.
Will we then worry that the Amazons and Googles will then own everything and all of these smaller shops, all of these other agencies, these specialists?
Do they not already?
Yeah,
I hear you. The answer, again, I always go back to, I think you see something blow up like this, and then you see a public resistance to it. And you're seeing that huge right now. Like, you see so much public opinion pushing back on Amazon and going to local artisans and promoting local artisans and trying to give them opportunities to sell on different platforms. But it's not just, I mean, even companies, who owns Etsy? Like Etsy's been doing a pretty good job of like promoting local artisans and taking a small cut and just being done with it, right? But yeah, the answer is right now, if you don't think Google owns you, just how many people in here use Gmail and how much do you pay for it? Because if Google tomorrow is like, hey, that's a nice little email you got there, you'd be ashamed if something happened to it, they could charge you $1,000 a year. You'd almost have to do it. You know what I mean? So they kind of already are in that space of control.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
One more.
This guy's from Google. I'm in trouble.
I'm Clark. I'm from Hulu. No, just kidding.
Yay for the bear.
Yeah,
I really like that
I'm
show.
actually pretty new to this industry, so I'm going to ask more of a historical question just because I don't know. But what I've heard is that alcohol had an issue with that 21 plus law for advertising. So I'm curious, if you could help me understand, like, how did brands like Captain Morgan get over that? And then also, like, will cannabis follow in the same footsteps?
Again, historically, it was what they were allowed to do, and then when the 21 plus came in, it was a matter of the percentage of audience based upon Nielsen rating was the composition at least 75% or higher, 21 plus. Some brands then instituted a higher percentage. Like that, again, they self-regulated on top of self-regulation, okay? So they wanted to make sure that, hey, the show had to have at least 80%. And then also they time regulated. You pretty much was only, a late prime into overnight. You couldn't touch weekend, you couldn't touch daytime. So like those restrictions were in place. Since then, things have definitely loosened up a bit because again, those were self-imposed than necessarily, hard and fast, but yet each programmer still has their own, and because ultimately who has the content, they get to make that decision. And what do they want their content being surrounded by? Are they okay with that brand running in their commercial break or not? If they're, a family-friendly program, maybe you're watching on Discovery, are you going to necessarily want to see that? So I think the programmers and the owners of the content are still very actively involved in that. I know from the supplier side in satellite, I mean, we had a laundry list by each network on categories that they would or would not want out on air. And that includes gambling and, all the things that we're talking about right now. The content folks still hold the keys to a lot of this.
What I was going to say, but now on, social media and where they can't rely on the audience, they've got to do it on their own. They've got to age gate.
Well, that's where, the networks and programmers would get held accountable when, the group of old folks that just wanted to complain about stuff, had seen a spot in that show while they were watching their Sunday night programming. Oh my God, you told me to go have a drink. Yeah. They light up the phone board, right? They call the network. They call their provider. So if it's Dish or Comcast, so the last thing that any of the providers or the networks want are people calling them saying, I can't believe you're doing this, I'm going to boycott you, and so forth. When it's social media and the little computers that we all walk around with in our hand, well, what content will you watch? It's a little less obvious, right? You're not sitting in the room all five with your phone watching the same thing.
In California, the rule was, and it's so funny because it's so ridiculously arbitrary, when the first regs came out for advertising cannabis, the rule was that 72.7% of your audience, 72.7% of your audience has to be 21 plus. So when, for instance, the two companies that worked through Composite, we were doing all of the ease billboards when they were good, and they were all over, and we were always coming up against this. But part of the problem there, again, is like, how do you know? You don't know. You're like, well, we guess, and then they kind of have a hard time enforcing that we've got billboards up on the 405 for a cannabis company because we can't prove that we're hitting 72.7, and they can't prove we're not, and then the only person that wins, I guess, is the media company, the advertiser, right? In that case, Ease, and I guess I won too, right? So I'm not going to complain too much about it not being. So again, back to self-regulation, right?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Wonderful job, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. To paraphrase Dan, oh my God, I'm going to go tell you to go have a drink. We have a cocktail party, 4th floor, float at near the pool, 5:30, the Sundown Shindig, brought to you by Extreme Reach. Please join us there to network, meet and mingle. And we'll be back here tomorrow, 9:30, bright and early for another full day of sessions. So thank you very much.